Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in this what's turned out to be a little bit of a rainy evening. But we're excited to share an open space protection opportunity in the Mineral Hills with everyone. This is a property that we're really excited about, and we're here with Lori Sanders, who will be able to share some of the exciting ecological details of what turned out to be a really unique presentation going. All right, Lori, you want to take it away?
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thanks to everyone who's here. This is, as Sarah and I were talking about it, we met a few weeks ago on the property site, and I've explored areas nearby, the Ridgeview Conservation Area, but I'd never been on this parcel. So, why don't you? Sarah has the clicker, so to speak. So
All
she's in the
right.
power seat.
Right. So just to provide some background and context on an acquisition that we're really excited about, the Conservation Commission and the Office of Planning and Sustainability work on many open space acquisitions over a year. You know, we always have a lot of irons in the fire. Sometimes things rise to the top. Sometimes they percolate for a lot longer. And if we're lucky, we have one larger acquisition that rises to the top as our biggest priority in the fiscal year. So the open space plan is the city's vision and blueprint for open space, agriculture, conservation, multi-use trails, parks, and recreation needs. And sustainability and resilience includes protecting valuable habitat, restoring natural systems, and creating recreation, housing, and economic development in appropriate places while avoiding sprawl. A lot of open space protection is driven by opportunity, but this plan, which is also an element of the city's sustainable Northampton plan, helps us prioritize critical areas to protect. In the southern Mineral Hills, in which this parcel is located, is one of the top priorities.
So shall I continue, Sarah? Is
Sure.
that okay? Well, and then I guess I know a couple people on this Zoom, but I thought maybe it would be useful to say who I am. I'm wearing my historic Northampton hat, but previously I've done a lot of work for the city looking at all their conservation land. First, way back when in 1993, when I first got out of graduate school, and then 20 years later. And by that point, it had gone from 11 parcels totaling 800 acres to many, many more and over 2,000 acres. So by that point, the Ridgeview Conservation Area was associated with an adjacent subdivision. And so this is the corner where that circle is, where this particular parcel is located. And Sarah pulled me in wearing both of those hats because this area has some interesting human history as well as interesting natural history. So to look at it a little closer, Sarah, if you could hit that next button so that we get a sense of where the three parcels are. Um, these are the three parcels that together account for 76 acres. And I think what I wanted to show in this slide is two really a few different things. One is its proximity to not only the Ridge Conservation Area, but you can see to the north, there's another piece of conservation area off of Route 66. And then this is a parcel that's right along the East Hampton boundary. And so it's a fantastic opportunity for us to think about multi-town collaborations. And you can see that just to the south, that's the New England Forestry Foundation parcel, and then there's other protected lands nearby. So it's a jigsaw puzzle, and this represents a large piece.
Yeah, and this is one that really makes sense for the city because it really feels a whole. Sometimes we have to stretch a little bit to say, well, this is near another conservation area. This is really right in the middle of it. Like the city conservation land wraps around it. There's trails that already connect. So this was a great opportunity.
And it's a single owner with all three parcels who's very interested. And so here's again the outline. You can see some dashed lines of where there are some existing trails coming off the Ridge Conservation Area. The parcel on the northern side of this is, see that sort of long skinny piece, and then it increases in size. If you look at the deeds on Hampshire County, this was all part of the Long Division when Northampton was first settled by the English in 1654. By the late 1700s, this land was being subdivided. Strong, which is an important name in the history of Northampton, was one of the first owners. And that top lot, if you look at the deeds, it's the so-called Gunstock lot. And I love that kind of place name. And there are references for those of you who live in the area to King's Hill, which is the large hill off of to the north on 66. But these are the configuration of the three pieces. And you can see just to the west is one of the branches of the Manhan. So if we look, this is a 2023 aerial, which gives us a really a much different sense of where that property is. You can see the Ridge Conservation, the Ridge subdivision just to the north. And then to the east, there's a lot of historic gravel pits. And in a couple slides, you'll know exactly why. One of the things I want you to take a look at when you're looking at this image is there's a big sort of a little bit of a kind of a triangle on the western edge of this property. That's a big clearing. And in the northwest corner, that's where we're going to start our field trip. But you see that this image was taken and there's sort of this blush of green over most of it. It's one of the densest, most extensive mountain laurel stands I've seen in Northampton. So you're going to see some more images of that, but that's something that we can learn from this aerial image. Oh, and one last thing, those two red dots, those are vernal pools just off the property. So what's among the things that are interesting, and you always have to start right with the bedrock, and this is a property that has a lot of bedrock exposures. And one of the things that's neat in this area, when I've explored this area with John Brady, who some of you may know, trying to find this contact zone between the 400 million year old metamorphic rock and the much younger 200 million year old sandstone. If you going to the next image, that bedrock and then sandstone really also influenced how the superficial geology was influenced here. So after this is way above Glacial Lake Hitchcock, but this is, you can see to the principally almost all of the property has bedrock close to the surface. That's those lines going across. And then the sort of the tan matrix that's in the back, that's all a thin veneer of till, which is the unsorted, unconsolidated, rounded rock dumped as the glacier melted and left this area that then in the last 10,000, 12,000 years has been modified by erosion and plant and animal activity. What's really cool, and you can see this is a LiDAR image, so it's showing you the details of the topography. All of that very weird sort of looking landscape on the eastern side, just off the property, those are the gravel pits. And so as the glacier is melting, there's all these fine materials that are being deposited. And this whole part of Northampton is this vast outwash plain with these braided streams moving back and forth across the landscape. So for those of you who know this area, this is a section of town where not only are there gravel pits, most of which began operating after World War II when there was a big housing boom and concrete became so important. But this is, because of that, that's where you dig big holes and then you fill them in and they become city landfills. This is in the Glendale, just off this map is Glendale Road where the city of Northampton's um, now transfer station, and for a long time its dump was located. But these sandy outwash plains are historically, they covered about 20% of Northampton. It's a rare feature, these open sand plains in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in general. Um, and then very few remain in an unaltered state because they make great cemeteries, they make great gravel pits, they make great airports. Think Bradley International, think Westover. So here in Northampton, we have a few pockets, and ecologically they're pretty fascinating, and they have a very particular suite of plants and animals that persist there. So this is a neat property because it has just a little bit of that. Okay, next slide. So let's go on that field trip. And where we're going to start is in that northwest corner. This is a property that the Crescione family owned and operated for about 50 years. They owned something called Clear Falls, which is that area just off the property that has like a little aqua color. Some of you may have gone swimming there as kids. It hasn't been operable for the last, let's say, 15 or so years, but during the 50s and 60s, the Cresciones not only bought that parcel, but they bought all this land to the east. So let's take a field trip. We're going to begin in that northwest corner, which was overflow parking. And so one of the things that makes this property nice from a recreation standpoint, thinking about all the values that the city is interested in, is that the Crescione family developed beautiful trails on it. And some of them intersect, well, they intersect with other trails on other private lands. So when you head out from that former overflow parking, this is the kind of beautiful grassy trail that you begin on. And we're heading first to that 3 or 4 acre triangular clearing that I showed you in the aerial.
And one thing that's exciting about this property is the potential opportunity to create trails that are accessible to all, including people with mobility challenges or those who may not be comfortable hiking long distances. Many of the open space areas in Northampton include steep slopes or other impediments to creating accessible trails. When you think of other areas in the Mineral Hills, immediately as soon as you enter the trailhead, it's a steep slope, and it really precludes this type of trail. But we're always looking for new opportunities. So while this area includes opportunities for challenging or connecting hikes, it also includes portions that could make an ideal all-persons trail. And here, views of the hilltops to the southeast, some of the most ecologically interesting areas of the parcel, as we'll see shortly, and a great bird watching spot could all be accessed through an existing soft surface trail.
So this trail leads you into this clearing, which Sarah and I haven't had a chance yet to talk to the Crescione family, but it's really interesting. I'm not sure, it looks to me like they might have scraped some sand and gravel off of it, but when you first get there, it's this shrubby, brushy area with not only with outcrops of that 400 million year old bedrock, but there's also seeps and pockets of wetland habitat. So even though if you look at the DEP's detailed wetland map on Mass GIS, it shows no wetlands here at all, but these little seeps all drain directly into the Manhan River. And let's look at the next slide. It gives a slightly different view. As you first take that grassy trail, you come into the clearing. And I like, for those of you who know me, I always like to think, okay, what if I could go back in time 400 years, 500 years? These sandy plains, and probably in this area too, Native Americans were absolutely burning these areas. If you look at the 1831 map for the city of Northampton, you'll see the term plain on it in this section of town in the sandy outwash areas. and in many other locations. And that word plain for the English meant something very distinct, and it meant an open landscape in the uplands, whereas a meadow had its own vocabulary meaning, which was it was also open, but along a major river. So I love to think that we can understand some things about indigenous land management based on the place names that the English subsequently used. And they continued to maintain these areas. But as you come into this one, I'm not sure the last time that the Crescione family actually took a brush hog through here, but it's got lots of little blue stem up here in the upper corner. That's a lot of young sassafras beginning, and that's a very important host plant for Promethea silk moths, which are in serious decline in our area. And this is a brushy habitat that, while Sarah and I were there, as I said 3 weeks ago, one of the species that's in decline and being watched in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which we heard many, many, many times, is rufous-sided towhee, because this kind of brushy habitat is just, it's just very hard to find. It's either, you know, developed or grown up into forest. And as you move through, go to the next slide, Sarah. There's lots of sweet fern, there's young red maple, there's lots of young gray birch. There's also this in the upper corner, this is something called deerberry, which I don't see that often. It's got a specialist bee on it, which my husband has not yet found here in Northampton, but we intentionally each spring go to areas where is the deerberry growing. So this is a really terrific spot. And in the lower corner is something called pasture rose. Both of these species are ones that, you know, you find only on high, dry ridge tops in Northampton, or in a very sporadically in a habitat like this. It's a very unusual, even though it's small, just 3 acres, it's unusual. And as I mentioned, they must have scraped it with the bulldozer, because there's lots of these exposures of bedrock. And in this case, the day we were there was this pink earth lichen, which I think many people have probably seen before, but there's just this vast swaths of it as you go through. And there's Sarah using iNaturalist.
And my hood is up because the mosquitoes were pretty ferocious that day.
The other thing that I was surprised, and again, this is roundleaf sundew, which it occurs in Northampton and like only half a dozen locations. And is it rare? No, it's a very interesting plant. It's one of the insectivorous plants that gets its nutrients by trapping insects, and it likes this bare mineral soil that's wet. And in Northampton, that basically you find in old gravel pits and places like this. There are a couple of boggy areas where you can find some sundews, but anyway, again, it's not rare, but within Northampton, unusual. As you climb up out of that slope, you get to many more of these rocky outcrops. And from the next image, you can see one of the things that I think surprised Sarah and I was the spectacular view as you look to the south. And in the distance, you can see Mount Tom on the next slide. So it's kind of hidden in the mist. It is a view of Mount Tom. So it's really, I mean, this was a big, big surprise to both of us. Now we're going to head into the forest.
Yeah, and just generally, this is a property where I really needed Lori's help to tell a compelling story about why this was worthy of protection. Because it's nestled into these other protected lands, it made a lot of sense for us. But from a desktop analysis, we didn't expect to find anything really exciting, like a lovely forested area for sure, but it was one that revealed a lot of surprises that were just so exciting.
So as you just leave that big rocky or opening clearing, There's a lot of till and bedrock exposed. In this area, the forest is pretty young and certainly something has grown up in the last, let's say, 30 or 40 years. The plant that's highlighted is something, it doesn't have a very nice common name. I'm not sure how it got it, but it's called bastard toadflax. And it's another species which, again, is not rare in the Commonwealth, but within Northampton, it's really uncommon. You find it up on the Sawmill Hills and in the Mineral Hills, and and that's pretty much it. It's not over at Fitzgerald Lake. As you move further into the forest, this first part is pretty rocky and with, as I mentioned, those giant swaths of mountain laurel, which are pretty impenetrable. So Sarah and I, we were on trail and off trail, but when we were there, the mountain laurel was at its peak. So that was really a special treat. And there you can see it in all its glory. Next image, Sarah. Go right along. The other thing is, so although mountain laurel covers big chunks of this property, there's lots of other areas which are fairly open and exposed. And as you move to the east, there's some nice topography. It's a kind of a level crest, and then you begin dropping down, heading east, heading toward those gravel pits. Next image. One of the things so most of this forest here is an overstory of a variety of oaks. There was quite a bit of many tulip trees, which is reaching its northern limit here. And the other thing that Sarah and I found lots of in the understory was American chestnut, which gives us a sense of just, if we could go back in time only 150 years, the forest composition here would have been very, very different. And the other thing that the Crescione family mentioned to Sarah, the heirs, is that their parents did not timber this land after they acquired it. And so as you move through, either on the trail or slipping off of it, there was some pretty good sized oak and other trees in the forest. And so I intentionally got Sarah to stand next to this to give you a sense of one of the larger trees, but not the largest. The next couple slides are even were a surprise to us. So this is the area called the Mineral Hills, which I really think of as very much a marketing ploy. We're very close to where the Loudonville lead mines were the prospecting unsuccessfully in the 18th and 19th centuries. And here we found two pits where people tried, and so basically I think for all of these areas, the goal was yeah, you would love to have a strike, but really you wanted to just kind of get enough to get other people interested, and then you flipped the property. And so we found these big hunks of exposed ore, the bedrock, the matrix, where in other parts, including on another conservation area not far away off of Route 66, you can find pieces of galena and other minerals that are lead bearing. Really what they were hoping for was not lead, but a big strike of silver. But once the West opened up, they were out of here. But this was one of the interesting kind of human history components of this parcel, and I'm sure we can learn more about it. But you see, principally, it's very much a deciduous forest. And all throughout, there are some little threading trails, but the Crescione family and certainly the neighbors in the area are really taking advantage of the beautiful trails that thread through this property. Lots of scarlet tanagers calling while we were there, black-throated greens, sort of all the usual forest specialists that you would expect to hear. Pileated woodpeckers were calling while we were there. Next image, Sarah. So that trail that we were on intercepts the trail that comes off of the Ridge Conservation Area and which abuts it. And and so as you go down that swale on this particular property is the beginning of a headwater stream, which is also a resource area that's not identified on any of the wetland maps or connecting tributary maps. You can see Sarah here is seated next to the spring. And in the next image, as you look downstream, this brook eventually flows into Hannum Brook, which is a different tributary to the Manhan River. But I think one of the things about a parcel like this is it like earth-shatteringly diverse in terms of its biodiversity? Well, no, but like so many of these parcels, it's big, it's connecting, and it has, I think, some hidden biodiversity elements. Like these are aquatic mushrooms called swamp beacons, which I've only seen in two other areas, one off of in the Lathrop property, which is not too far away, the East Hampton one, and the other was in the adjacent the conservation area just to the north, owned by the city in a beautiful pocket. But these headwater streams, which this audience is like, I recognize many of your names, so I know that you're thoughtful about climate change. And if you look at the state's report, headwater streams like this are among the most imperiled when you think about the impacts of climate change, because it's not only water quality and quantity that are that threaten these, but these are springs, the groundwater emerging, and both Hannum Brook and portions of the Manhan are cold water fisheries. So that's another contributing component that this property provides from a larger perspective.
And this property didn't rank really high in the Nature Conservancy's resilient forest mapping or in carbon sequestration. But again, I think that was a failure of the mapping to capture these wetlands on the site.
One of the things as you go down this downstream, which the next images will include, so we're getting into the section now where we're in this transition zone between the metamorphic rock and the richer, when that 200 million year old sandstone erodes, it is has more components that are more pH neutral. And in this forest, we began to see many species which indicated a much higher soil fertility than what we were seeing up on that kind of bony, rocky ridge. There was an abundance of sugar maple. You can see these swaths of ferns that Sarah is standing in, including, next image, there are a couple of ferns that, in my wanderings in Northampton, I don't encounter all that often. So gives you the slide on the left gives you a sense of it's just more open here along that brook. But this is something called broad beach fern on the other side, and it's one that I just don't see it that often in Northampton. So it's always a treat. And from here, we're going to go downslope even further, heading into the sandy outwash. Oh, this is one last image. This tangle is grapevines, and basically, for those of you who are on this Zoom, when you see grape, you know that the soil chemistry is much more fertile. They are very selective about where they live, and so for me, higher fertility soils, I always think, okay, what else might I find? So anyway, I think this property, it would be fun to do a little more exploring. So as I mentioned, we're going to go down. So this little piece of this property intercepts the sandy outwash. And so it goes from this rocky section and then a pretty long stretch where it's a gentle gradient, and then we're going to get to the sandy outwash plains. So the next image will give you a sense. And as you might imagine, the sandy outwash plain is pretty flat. So these next images will give you a sense of that. So look at it's just kind of dead flat. Groundwater appears to be pretty close to the surface as you wander through here. When I was there, just the day after Sarah and I went, the next image will show you a vernal pool one also that I think it's important for us to kind of remember that site visits are so important, because this vernal pool was not at all identified on any of the state maps. And then I went off the property on the next image, which is a much larger vernal pool, which is recognized on the state's vernal pool data layer. But I think one of the things, and these vernal pools are really special habitats, I think this audience pretty much knows that this provides important nesting habitat for spotted salamanders and wood frogs and many other species which depend on these areas during their breeding cycle and during that early stage of development. And years ago, someone from the Nature Conservancy told me, well, that's what the Nature Conservancy did. They protected, if you think of the world as a giant chocolate chip cookie, they were interested in the chips. And I think, and since that time, what the Nature Conservancy and I think ecologists generally have recognized is that protecting the chips are important, but you have to protect the matrix nearby. And so the cookie dough is also part of the important component, because although these animals are breeding in these vernal pools, the adults are here for a matter of weeks. The rest of the time, they're living in those uplands. So 11 months of the year, they're in that adjacent forest that we just came down through. So if you look at the next image, this is also off the property. This is one of the gravel pits that is, oh, no, this is the brook. This is actually just before the end of the property, there's a perennial stream, and this drains directly to Hannum Brook, which then is a tributary. And you can see there's sandy deposits here, which is in that outwash plain, but there's some, we're very close to the till deposits on top of the bedrock. So will we ever find that contact zone between the 200 and 400 million year old rocks? Well, that would be a big thrill. I don't know. I think it's buried. Anyway, the next image is going to show you this abandoned gravel pit. And one of the things in this area years ago, I found nesting box turtle here. These sandy deposits are really important for turtle nesting, and that big swath that you see in the distance that looks like a giant hedge, that is all regrettably Japanese knotweed, which I would say threatens a lot of habitats in our area. But these sandy plains are really important for box turtles, hognose snakes, which is another species which is in serious decline and is being tracked by the Commonwealth, black racers. These are habitats which historically were fire prone, with pitch pine and low bush blueberry and lots of little blue stem, a tight suite of species that could cope with frequent fire, nutrient poor soils, droughty soils, really tough living conditions for most plants and therefore most animals too. Next image, Sarah, please. So although if you look at the states, this is biomap. So this is an algorithm that the Nature Conservancy and UMass, through their conservation assessment prioritization system, all these complicated algorithms working together and working with the Commonwealth, are trying to identify the high priority areas. So although this area in green on the right-hand side of the screen is a former gravel pit, it has been identified as a critical natural landscape because these sandy plains are fairly rare habitats. And then to the west, these other areas in the pastel colors, what the state recognizes that, okay, there's different levels. There's some of these areas which are priorities at the level of the Commonwealth because they're so rare and unusual. And then there are many others that are of local significance. So all of these areas on the western side are habitats which the state's natural heritage and endangered species area has identified as important, either as local landscape, as supporting aquatic habitat right there along the Manhan River in the brighter blue, the buffer zone, which is in the powder blue, and then this pinky purple is area that's biomap for local rare species. I'm not sure which species that is, if it's a dragonfly or some other kind of, but it's certainly some kind of aquatic animal, potentially wood turtle. But all of that section there along the Manhan is recognized as cold water fisheries. So these are some of the ecological and a little bit of the human history that are some of the features that make this property unusual and noteworthy. And then these next couple image slides are the ones that Sarah's going to run through in terms of the 76 acres and how it's makes sense for us.
Yeah. So I mentioned that the city's open space plan really provides a blueprint for conservation acquisitions. So how does this property fit into that? It's proximate to other conservation land. Not only is it next to it, it also has an existing trail network that links to others. You know, sometimes when we're pursuing an acquisition, we'll do a site visit like this and we'll not find one trail on the property. So we're, continually bushwhacking through all the mountain laurel and through thorns and knotweed and all sorts of plants to try and figure out, where the property is and what it's all about. But this one was unique that it has a really robust trail network already. Has a lot of varied habitats. It's an acoustic sanctuary, so you really can't hear human sounds or traffic. And when Lori and I were out there, we heard birds, we heard frogs, but we really, for the most part, weren't able to hear traffic noises or lawn mowing or other things that are common, even in bigger conservation areas. There's really not a lot of invasive plant species that we'll have to manage, except for around the fringes in areas that have already been disturbed. The interior of the property is really pretty free from invasive species that threaten biodiversity. It has some existing parking, not only at the trailhead entrance to the ridge trails, but also an area that was formerly used for parking for Clear Falls that could easily be converted for additional parking if necessary. And it has a really just interesting geology and human history. And Lori touched on some of it, and this was just a quick analysis of things to look at. But the further that we dig into it, I think the more that we'll find, both with the geology and the intersection with Glacial Lake Hitchcock and the history that people have used the property for over time. And here are some photos that Lori took. Deer are very common, but it's always a special thing to encounter a new fawn. So that was a treat. So what are our next steps for this project? So it's a $600,000 purchase, about $700,000 in total costs. We're pursuing a state local acquisitions for natural diversity grant that will be due a week from today in July with a winter announcement. I do have some local approvals to go through. This will need to go through City Council. Conservation Commission has already enthusiastically supported this acquisition. And then we'll be doing a Community Preservation Act application in the fall, followed by a fundraising campaign. And if all goes well, a 2026 closing, at which time the property would then be open to the public. And it will also be doubly protected with a restriction to be held by the Kestrel Land Trust. Questions or discussion points anybody wants to bring up? I'm so thrilled to present this to everyone. Yeah. Chris? Chris Stratton? Unmute.
Let's try this again can you hear me now?
Yes.
I changed my background picture to a map of this. I don't know if it's showing, but one of the city has long had a sort of a flagpole access out onto Drury and put down some bluestone up the hillside there on a very steep and kind of limited trail. But the middle of the existing conservation parcel, south of the ridge and north of the Gunstock lot, is pretty much all wetland. And so really the only way across that is on some very narrow plank bridges that kind of skirt the ridge. The Ridge's developer had this grand plan with like formal boardwalks and things that never happened. So one of the things that's really neat about this property is that it has a woods road that runs from the existing city land in the east out to the west, and it connects to that bluestone path. I sort of hope that access to that meadow may mean a more gently climbing path that has switchbacks or something, but just getting that woods road kind of establishes a missing connection in the city's existing holdings. Um, Also, the other thing, I'd already been really looking in this area because, as some may know, Sovereign Builders just bought all of the old breaky gravel property that's along the East Hampton town line there. Some of it's in East Hampton, some of it's in Northampton. I have to assume at some point they're going to put in, a two-town development proposal, and that probably would have open space reservations and all of that. So I was looking at it, wanting to be sure that, what gets reserved there is not just the chocolate chips, not just the wetlands, but some of those forest roads that provide connectivity, from the city's parcel to the New England Forestry parcel at the lower corner of Drury, from people who live in the subdivision to the conservation lands, from people out on Drury, in from the west, so that we get an actual network of access rather than just well, on the map it looks like it connects, but it actually goes through the settling pond of the driveway, or something like that, as has happened a few times in the past. Um, Also, interestingly, I think that picture of the outwash area that had the not abandoned knotweed, I think that's actually on the Sovereign ex Breaky property on the
That's
other
correct.
side of what the city owns. I mean, most of that
That's
gravel
right.
pit is either theirs or already the city's, and you can kind of just barely skirt the edge of that. Um, but you couldn't really get from the city's, yeah, this picture, I think that's actually
Yeah.
just east of the sort of the um, throat of the city's little upside down dragon plot. Um,
Yeah, this is you're absolutely right. This is offsite. This is the former Breaky property.
and to the left of this, there's kind of the bluff that's the edge of the digging, and then you get up on top of it, and there's a woods road that sort of goes between the Crescione properties, which I'd been calling Campbell because that's the current generation, and the Breaky, now Sovereign Builders property. And there's woods roads all the way through there. There are the trails that you were hiking that go through the mountain laurel, some of them overgrown, some not. So there's a real wonderful opportunity for connecting, conservation areas the city already has, via this property. And if the right, permission for development deal can be done with Sovereign, then also across that to the New England forestry property, and really really have a big chunk of contiguous conserved land, either city or CRs on other people's land, or New England forestry. That all works well. And the parking out on Drury is very useful. I think a lot of these places, a lot of city conservation doesn't really have parking, so often the best way to get there is to bike to it. At which point then you kind of want to go through it too, rather than leave your bike. And that's played a role on keeping watch on, down trees, invasive species. I know north of the Little Brook in the city's holding, out the old cow pasture area out towards 66, there's a lot of bittersweet. On the southwest of the brook, I haven't seen it. And yeah, the bulk of this is a much healthier forest, which is great, but it's also good to have people non-disruptively keeping an eye on it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
definitely. So no, nothing has been filed yet as far as development on the adjacent properties goes. But in the center of this picture, you can see a wetland delineation flag. And what the Conservation Commission does have before it, which will be coming up in an upcoming hearing, is a confirmation of the wetland boundaries and making sure that they're delineated accurately, which typically precedes a development application. And, if a cluster, development were proposed, then we would absolutely be looking at being able to protect some of the contiguous properties so that it fits in not only with the area that's already been conserved, but with the area that we hope to conserve with this project. Brian?
Thank you, Sarah and Lori, for your wonderful presentation. Sarah, has the landlord agreed to sell at that $600,000 price?
Yes. Yeah,
Uh,
that's our agreed on price. So we have an option.
And that option goes for how long?
That will be through the land grant period.
Okay. Refresh my memory about land grants. Is that subject to any federal funds or is that totally state?
It's not. So the funds are available through the state, at least for this award, and the city is able to be reimbursed for eligible expenses at a rate of 66%. So we definitely will have a funding gap that will need to be covered, both with CPA and likely donations as well.
Great. Thank you.
Anybody else with any questions or concerns, other thoughts?
I know one last thing that is building on what Chris said too, is that it's right along the East Hampton line, and any potential subdivision would include that, and then just let's see, what direction is that? But there is some other existing conservation area. It's kind of a skinny long piece along Hannah Brook, so I don't know if it would really make sense for any kind of human trails, but certainly as a corridor that wildlife can move through, will be a valuable resource.
Is there any way I could get my map up, show that, or?
Make him a co-host.
Hey, I'm talking, but. Wait, where would this be? Ah, here we go. Wait. Yeah. System. Sorry, I haven't done this on this computer before. Wait, what? I'm sorry, I'm not figuring out how to do this.
Were you looking to show East Hampton parcels? I can pull up a map.
Well, I have a map that sort of shows all of this with ownership, but I'm not. Well, this may not.
So just for a snapshot, so here are the parcels that we're looking at. And here's adjacent protected land in Northampton.
Yeah.
And it's a long game for protecting land. You don't often get to protect a whole big chunk all at once. So when I started with the city longer ago now than I'd like to admit, none of this protected land existed.
Yeah.
This started with the ridge, and then this was intended to be Kensington Estates. That happily for conservation purposes did not happen and became permanently protected. And this was acquired later in conjunction with Wagon Trails Dog Park, which wasn't built but is used privately. So it's exciting to be able to piece all of these together over time.
Yeah, I mean, just to show all of it. If you go up to that corner where the cursor is, that's the Simmons piece. Oh, sorry, no, that's my cursor. On across 66, there's the Senni purchase and the Simmons donation. And then there's supposed to be a trail there. There isn't, but yeah, that piece. And then you can come down, cross 66, go in, go across the brook, go west, and then currently you can only go across the conservation parcel by going through that neck below the fan of the ridge, plank bridges. But with the Woods Road on the Crescione parcel, you can go west and get out, or you can go south. You can go south across the East Hampton line, then you're on the Sovereign parcel that they bought from Breaky, but probably not the part they'll build on. You go past the East Hampton Water Tower, which is that circle down there, and then that last piece is the New England forestry on both sides of the river. They don't let people in south of Drury anymore because everybody was digging in the bank in the old mine, but they still allow you on the north bank. Unfortunately, they just logged that, so it's kind of torn up right now, but there is a trail there north of Drury up there. So yeah, it's really interesting in the connectivity, and it is both wildlife connectivity and human connectivity if we can get a few of the woods roads across the Sovereign parcels preserved.
Thanks, Chris. Ken?
Hi, this is very exciting parcel, and I'm just wondering if there's any kind of advocacy which would be helpful in furthering the project.
Not at this point, but there definitely will be opportunities to come. So we'll be submitting the land grant in the next week. That doesn't have a ton of opportunity for public engagement, but other funding sources that we'll be looking at definitely will, including community preservation and advocating at public meetings. So if anybody wants to email me, and I usually make a slide with my contact info, I'm sorry I didn't do that. But if anybody wants to email me to get on a list to be sure to be informed about this, I'd be happy to add you. That would be great.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's it, but thank you all so much for coming, and Lori for.
And I guess
Wonderful.
the only other thing I'll add is, clearly Chris and Alec and I don't know some of the other folks on here, but I also know. Anyway, I think if you have other nuggets to share based on your familiarity with either this specific parcel or the area in general that would support the grant, oh, it would be fantastic to send that information to Sarah, because she and I really we dipped in there, but clearly Chris, you know this area much better than I do, and I'm sure you could contribute some other important elements. So anyway, thank you all so much for coming tonight. Mark, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just playing around with some desktop mapping here too, and we just actually used this for another grant application. But the property does show up fairly decently on the UMass EcoAssess website for ridgetop connectivity, which I know it's not one of the things they usually ask for, but certainly we built it into some narratives from some grant applications too. But anyway, just for what it's worth.
Great.
Thanks, Mark.
Can you send that over to Sarah?
Thanks so much, everyone.
Okay.
Have a good evening.
All right. Thanks, everyone. It's one. I have to say it, even though we're not together, it feels like a very nice community. So I'm glad, and I look forward to meeting the people who I don't know on this call yet. That's just great. So thank you so much.
Thank you.